Welcome back to Big Asian Energy. Hey, I'm sure, watch Hollywood movies, TV shows, and all that kind of stuff all the time. But have you ever wondered what it's actually like to break into Hollywood? I mean, we see the people on shows, on the TV, on the big screens, and it's something that I often wondered. I mean, how do we go through the actual process of breaking in? It's a dream so many of us have. Now, today we get to dive into this specific topic because we're talking to Ada Tseng, who is the co author of Breaking into New Hollywood, a career guide to a changing industry, who is co written with Jon Healey and coming out in August. Now, you may have probably heard of Ada because she has also a podcast called Saturday School, which, speaking of which, freaking love that name, that talks about what it's like with Asian American experiences each year. She captures different topics. And before this, she was an editor at the Los Angeles Times, where she contributed to coverage of the entertainment industry as well as Asian American media representation. Ada's work has always focused on demystifying Hollywood careers and amplifying Asian American voices within the creative community. So if you listen to Ada today, you're going to learn a lot about what it's like to actually break into Hollywood, especially in the age of AI. Welcome to the show, Ada.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a nice introduction.
Well, it's so easy to introduce you because there's so much to talk about. I mean, I don't often get to interview somebody who is a journalist who talks specifically about, especially Hollywood, which is so mystifying for Asian Americans, but also has previously made a Hotties of Asian American calendar. Like, there's
I
so many things
know.
to get right? Like, what a concept. So I'm just gonna give you a quick second to just kind of like start us off here. Can you tell us a little bit about your background before we start diving into the details?
Yes, so I'm Taiwanese American. I grew up in San Jose, California. Um, I am a journalist, writer, editor. But like a lot of people you talk about in your work, in your book, um, I probably was not pushed into that. And I was supposed to do computer science, but then found another route. Um, but yeah, I started my career covering Asian Americans in media in a small magazine at UCLA, an online magazine called Asia Pacific Arts. So
Hmm.
that was sort of my random way into journalism, covering Asian Americans in Hollywood, mostly through kind of like film festival circuits, actually. Because at that
Huh.
time in the mid 2000s, there weren't that many? There were some, but you would watch TV and be like, "There's one. There's another one." I think Phil Yu of Angry
Yeah.
Asian Man talks about this a lot, where he's running his blog. He's like, "There's one," and it's like, let's go find him." And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, growing up in North America, I loved Hollywood. I love movies, and getting to see an Asian face in movies when I was growing up. Like, now we're starting to see more and more. But I remember it was kind of like, the experience when you like, you take a dog out to a park, and then like anytime there's another dog, you're just like the dog starts freaking out. That's kind of how I
yeah,
felt. Not that we're comparing myself to a dog, but every time I would see somebody who looks like me, who looks Asian, Asian, East Asian, South Asian, there would be this like moment of excitement, like, oh, there's one of us. So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious, when you first started your career going into it, was there a particular focus of why it is you wanted to highlight Asian Americans in media?
To be honest, I think I was at UCLA, realizing I didn't want to be an engineer, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, so it was kind of like that was the path, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I loved movies, right? And I loved kind of like reading about movies. I love reading like celebrity profiles,
Hmm. Oh yeah.
and um but I think I was just trying to figure out what to do. So I just did a whole bunch of internships, and the one internship that stuck was that magazine that I was talking about, Asia Pacific Arts. So that was one of my first internships where I started writing. So I think it was not necessarily I was looking for it, but it was just like I found it and it was a really good match because
Mm.
yeah, I could just talk to fellow Asian Americans and learn. Um, and it's just, I don't know, it's really fun chatting with people. And at that time, oh my gosh, at that time though, one is, like, the Asian Americans were emerging, so they weren't that big, so
Mm.
we weren't talking to Hollywood stars. So we also didn't have the Hollywood, like, publicists, like, really controlling our the interview, right? So it was just pretty casual conversations like this. But then the other thing that was really cool and mind-blowing that probably kept us there for a long time was that it was alwa also a time when mainstream media didn't cover Asian film that much. So
Mhm.
when there was, like, big Asian movie stars coming to LA, like, we could actually get in to those. So we would, like, we would, like I was, like, in the press junket room with, like, Tony Leung. We were at the Curse of the Gold was it Curse of the Golden Flower for the Chow Yun Fat and Gong Li, and, like, Bollywood stars would come. I've seen, like, the biggest Bollywood stars because just at that time, nowadays, I think a lot of people would know, like, "Oh, we need to cover this." A lot of people, will be interested in this, but at that time, kind of the big mainstream magazines would be like, "Wait, who is this guy?" You know?
Hmm.
So they wouldn't send their people there, so us as, like, college students, straight out of college students at this tiny online magazine, we could get those interviews. So that's why I think I ended
Wow.
up staying for that long because it was so fun. Like, I was in, it wasn't like a one-on-one interview, but, I got to, like, be in the press junket interviewing Ang
Mhm.
Lee, right? And that's like, if I could do that now, it would feel,
Oh
like,
my gosh.
mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's actually, I think, what gave my parents something to hang on to in the sense of, like, "Wait, what are you doing? Like, you're writing, but you're writing for, like, not like LA Times, but, like, an Asian American magazine out of a university that no one's
Yeah.
ever heard of." But I was like, "But I got to meet Ang Lee. I have a picture of Ang Lee." And then they're like, "Oh, yeah, that is pretty," you know?
That moment of recognition, right? Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I feel like I've spoken to so many extremely successful Asian Americans in so many different industries from, like, tech and everything, and there's always a story somewhere in there of, like, the first time that their parents went from, "I have no idea what my kid does," to, like, "Oh, you're actually doing something real." I feel
Yeah.
like that is such a classic moment of, like, "Wait a second, so you gave up your path into becoming a doctor or an engineer to do what again?" To then, like, "Oh, okay, like, I'm proud of you, like, this is big." Was that the moment?
I think so. I think they were still worried about me financially, I'm sure. Yeah, but I mean, kind of going back to the book that I'm working, well, that I keep saying we're working on. I guess we're not working on it. It's too, wait, done breaking into New Hollywood. I think a lot of it is just people not understanding the industry or just creative careers in general, and it makes sense, you sort of have, um, especially, specifically, like, this Taiwanese Americans, right, who my
Mhm.
parents, came to America for grad school, so education was, like, a huge, huge priority, and there is sort of like a hope and expectation there, just because, like, we're people that are good at school. We're people who could become engineers and doctors, and lawyers. That's already a privilege, right? The fact that,
Mhm.
like, that could have been a path for me, that's already a privilege. Um, so, like, I feel like, well, looking at me going into a career that they didn't understand naturally is like, they're gonna be worried about that.
Sure.
Um, and I'm not saying that parents shouldn't be worried if their kids wanna go into Hollywood because it is a really chaotic, hard industry, but I think a lot of it is also like, what are you doing? Are you actually carving a path? Like, is what you're doing actually gonna work, or are you just
Sure.
flailing, you know? And
Yeah.
then, so I think, Hollywood's like that, but also kind of writing's a little bit like that too, where I feel like for,
Yeah.
like, a decade, you look like you're failing.
Yeah,
And, like,
especially
yeah.
by that standard, right? By
Yeah,
by
yeah,
that expectation.
yeah.
I mean, you've been a journalist with the LA Times for, some time, right? What was it that led you to decide, "I'm gonna write a book about how to break into Hollywood"?
So it was actually a project that I was doing when I was at the LA Times. I was on a team that was kind of about service journalism, like news you can use. How can we do stuff to kind of help. The idea is like news can be so overwhelming and horrifying. People don't want to read it because it's just like scary all the time. So I feel like the idea of that team was, well, is there something we can like actionable we can give people to do? Like what, or, and
Mhm.
even if it's not actionable, can we do some sort of explainers, right? So at least you get some information, right? So I feel like that was the mission of the team. And because I came from doing not only like entertainment coverage, but kind of very specific coverage of people in entertainment that, did not come with connections, right? And people who um really probably had a harder time because, the lack of representation, all of these things, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I was like, well, we're the LA Times. Like a lot of entertainment coverage in general is about people who are succeeding, right? Whether it's like for
Mhm.
award shows or, I have this new project coming out. Let me like it's all of that. But everyone in LA knows people who work in the industry and we know
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's hard, it's brutal. And
Mhm.
I was like, well, we should create explainers to kind of help people there or explain that because I feel like
Yeah.
I just saw, a lot of, what covering Asian Americans in Hollywood, you see a lot of like strife. I mean, you see a lot of people spinning around in circles. You see a lot of people kind of, and the saddest thing is when you see people go into this chaotic industry and then when it's hard, they think it's
Mhm.
them, right? And then
Hmm.
all that insecurity and, it kind of crushes them, right? And, like, I just felt like if you could just explain that from the beginning, so, explain that this is an industry that has a lot of rejection. Like, if you're in this
Mhm.
industry and you're getting rejected over and over and over again, like, that is actually part of the industry, you know what I mean? As
It's
opposed to,
normal.
like, yeah, as opposed to,
Mm.
like, "Oh, I'm terrible at this. I'm really bad at this,
Mhm.
blah, blah, blah." It's so
Mhm.
that's kind of where it came from. Sort of like, okay, there's
Mm.
some people in the world who come from Hollywood, they have connections, they can talk to a lot of these people, they know how things work. And
Mhm.
there's other people that don't. But, if we're
Mhm.
talking about kind of thinking about whether we can get a more even playing field, like you can think about the Oscars and, whether Asian Americans are winning awards, and that's really exciting too. But the other side of it is like, okay, with people who are coming in, how can we help them not like spin around in circles and like burn out and, just really be defeated like during the
Mhm.
time where other people know what they've gotten into and they're just building,
Mhm.
building, building, building.
Hmm. I love what you said at one point where you talked about how there's people who kind of are coming into the industry where they already have an idea of how things really work. And then there are
Oh,
people who are still trying to break in the industry and might be holding, it sounds like, some misconceptions. Can you tell us a
yeah.
little bit more about, for those who know how things really work, how does Hollywood really work? If you're, let's say, an actor or somebody wanting to have a foothold in the industry.
Well, I think Hollywood, out of probably all industries, has the biggest gap between what people think it is and what
Mm,
people even portray it as themselves, because there's sort of like the mystique and the glamour of Hollywood, and that is part of the
mm,
game, right? Kind of like,
mm.
um, showing your best parts, right?
Yeah.
Versus the actual reality of Hollywood, which, I mean, it's brutal in so many ways, but I mean, it's from the very basics, it's a gig industry, right? So nobody
Yeah.
has a job for that long. So you're constantly looking for a job. So it's just like from the get-go, it's an unstable industry, right? Um, but it's also like the ones that get the most attention are such a small sliver of Hollywood in general, right? So I think when we think of people working in Hollywood, we probably think mostly of actors, but not
Mhm,
even like 100% of actors, like the 2% of
mhm,
actors who are celebrities and famous, right? And then
mhm.
maybe we think of directors and writers. But if you look at the credits of any movie, there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of
Massive.
people who make that movie, right? And all of those
Mm,
people also work in Hollywood, right? But I feel like
mhm,
there's just so many stereotypes about Hollywood. And, some of them
Mm,
are merited. Is There is glamour, which comes with
mm,
superficiality, and that's part of the business too. Um,
mhm,
but at the end of the day, most people in Hollywood are people who really love a certain craft. They got really, really good at it. They
mm.
had to get really good at it, otherwise they
Yeah,
didn't even have a shot. And then they had to figure out how to, jump from to job and build their career that way. And
yeah,
it's hard because it's not like a straight line, and,
no.
I'm actually curious about you because you do so much coaching for people, right? And, um,
Mhm.
I wonder, kind of coaching careers in kind of business or other things. I feel like it's different than Hollywood and creative careers, but, like, we need to learn from that. 'Cause I think sometimes, like, with people who are artists and, creative, a lot of times you don't even wanna think about that because that's kind of the reason
Mhm,
we didn't pick a, like like a secure path, right? Because
mm.
we're not the business-minded person, you know? Like, if we were, maybe we would, have been an investment banker or something, but, like, we didn't, like, if we
I
were
mean,
good at
I'm
all
gonna go
this.
ahead and say
Yeah.
I feel like, the world has enough investment bankers. I Don't get me wrong, I have friends who are investment bankers. It's an interesting industry. I think we're good. I don't really see that this is something the world needs that many more of. But you're right. I think there are certain things about I would say that there's a certain things about every industry that has a kind of universality to it. And
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
things you mentioned that is such a prominent thing because I think my big belief is that inner game is really everything. Like how
Mm.
you view exactly as you said, like how do you view getting rejected as something that's so personal and not getting affected by it is difficult. I mean,
Yeah.
I know a little bit of about the acting industry in the sense of like, my sister or I have friends who have gone to auditions. And when you get rejected from audition, which is most auditions, it's pretty rare that somebody just
Most
books an audition
auditions,
on you.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
most auditions you're going to go into. You're just not
Yeah.
a fit. And how do you deal with that impact when you're walking away and you're like, I didn't get it, and not get affected by it for the next shot and the next shot. And it doesn't matter if it's, a promotion into the next level of your career or, trying to get a different job. It's all the same. It's how do you deal with that mindset so that you can continuously take your shot?
I think it's
And
so
mhm,
hard, especially actors. I think, being a journalist early in my career is interviewing actors a lot. I think kind of you know, the the mystique or the glamour of actors was just really like the curtain was you revealed
oh
really
yeah,
quickly for me
because
because it's just
there's who they are on stage and then there's who they are behind the stage. By the way, I'm
yeah.
curious. Did you feel like did you get kind of a view of that? Do you see what it's like for actors who are, presenting as their role selves versus their real self? Did you get a glimpse behind the curtain, so to speak?
Yeah, I think actors kind of get a bad reputation a little bit because
Mm,
I think when people think of actors, they think of celebrities, they think of famous people, right? And
sure.
they
Yeah.
often think of controversial famous people. You know what I mean? Who are spoiled, who are rich and spoiled, right? Um, but
Yeah.
actors are in a weird position for movies because they end up
Hmm.
being like the people promoting the movie, but they don't have a lot of the power unless you're famous and then you can like wield your
Mhm.
power. But for the most
Mhm.
part, actors are serving the director's vision, right? And you have to
Yeah.
put yourself and your image out there for consumption and criticism. Like think all the times where a movie like people hate the movie and they blame the actor, and it's like, that's just not really how it works in Hollywood. The actor, unless they're also a producer, unless
Mhm.
it's like Tom Cruise, they're also a producer. For the most part, the
Mm.
actor doesn't have the power, it's the
Yeah.
directors and the showrunners.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually really hard because not only are you usually getting rejected,
Uh-huh.
and you don't really
Yeah.
have that much control over which roles you get. But when you go out there, um, basically you're like the victim for you're like the person that people put all the responsibility on. So in a if it's great, you get a lot of the credit that you probably also shouldn't get. But when anyone has a complaint about it, like the actor is like the forward public facing person. And I think with creative careers, but actors especially, it's so hard to separate your work from yourself, right? Like if
Mhm.
somebody's like, "Oh yeah, she was like horrible in that movie," like, and especially for women, like
Oh
they're
gosh, yeah.
criticizing how you look, right? So it's like
Yeah.
that's like a hard thing when people think that they're criticizing like an actress for their work, but they say
Right.
something that's really just criticizing how they look. You know what I mean? So I
100%,
think
yeah.
all of that is really, really tough. Yeah. Not to
I
even mention the job of an actor, right? Like the actual job where you have to be so emotionally like better, you know? Like
essentially,
so
yeah. It's so
yeah,
vulnerable
yeah.
because you have to be
Yeah,
in
I
front
was
of,
talking to
or
somebody, one of my
Mhm.
the people I was talking to was saying, like, acting is actually like a service job because 'cause you're there to serve a story,
Mm.
and I don't think
Yeah,
people
it's a
think
very
of
good point.
acting like that. People think of
And
actors as, like, the people who need the attention, right? So you're kind of mad at the popular
mm,
kid at school that you thought had too much attention when you're, like, thinking
mm.
of actors, but I don't for the majority of actors, that's not they're just like the drama kids, in high school, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
that's who they are for the most part, you know?
Absolutely. And you're right. I think it is something that is so difficult that they have essentially these different jobs. They have the jobs in front of the camera, to, as you say, facilitate a story, to be seen for it, to tell the director's vision. And then of course they are now being tasked to carry that responsibility in the media and in the press and in public. And I think a lot of people are shocked to find out that acting, even if you're, unless you're at the very, very tippy top, you're getting those Marvel movies. For the most part, it's not the most lucrative, job you can get, given how much time and energy you might have had to put into it. And the difficulty, especially I think for Asian American actors, is that you're not just representing yourself and you're not just representing the show, but a lot of times you have to face the public in how you represent this entire community, which is not a monolith of millions of Asian Americans. And I think about what happened with Constance Wu
Mm.
when she left fresh off the boat. Do you know that story?
Yeah, yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that,
when
yeah.
she and there was all this controversy when she decided to leave, and it's like, if another TV show that's, still quite popular, I'm thinking, a show like Community, for example, and one of the actors decide to quit, chances are good that they don't get the same amount of pushback or flack that somebody else who is like Constance might have faced, because it is such a personal representation that we have projected on these actors to hold for us as representatives of who we are.
Yeah, I think they kind of get it from all sides, right? It's sort of like they feel like they have to represent for everybody because you want your project to be accessible to everybody. But then
Yeah.
you also have your community that you wanna, like, make proud. I think you can't help that to a certain extent. And then but your community can also be your harshest critics, right? So,
Yeah.
I think it's even harder when your own community kind of turns on you, right? Um, and but
It's
then that's
yeah.
also kind of you see that in general in Hollywood, right? Just even outside the Asian American community, you sort of build people up and then you tear them down, and it's it's just kind of a mess. So, no, but it's harder. I think it's harder when, um it's extra hard when, you're one of the few, right? And then you have
Hmm.
all of that burden, and not everyone understands how everything works. So people don't understand, like, Constance Wu did not make all the choices on Fresh Off the Boat, right? It's
Yeah.
not her
Oh,
show.
absolutely.
She's an
Yeah.
actor on the
Or
show.
Dr.
But then
Ken
also, like,
Jeong or all these things. Yeah.
yeah,
They
and
get
also,
so
like,
much
they are
pressure.
actors. Yeah, but
Hmm.
they're just actors with their own lives and their own goals. And then we mostly see them when they're, like, on their best behavior in front of a camera, very media prepped, being told what they're supposed to say so they can sell the movie because there's a lot of money on the line. You know what I mean? So, like,
Uh-huh, yep.
we think that's them, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, right? We don't know what happened there. So,
No.
I think yeah, I think I don't know that much about what happened with Constance Wood's situation in general, but I feel like in general, when I look at celebrity gossip now, I'm always like, we don't know what actually happened unless I
Yeah.
know that person. Unless you actually know that person, like we don't know, you know?
That's true. Which in your line of work, you probably do meet a lot of celebrities and actors and get to see kind of who they are, behind the scenes and getting to know the humanity behind them, right? And that's such a hard thing to do is that you have such a pressure to you don't have the freedom to be who you are. It's not even that the public won't accept you. It's just that, that's literally your job is to be the best face for the person. Now, going through your
Yeah.
book, and I'm just going to very quickly read out the table of contents because I think that it gives you a very clear idea. Because I was going in going, okay, how to break into Hollywood is probably going to be about history. I didn't realize this is basically a step by step manual, and there's so many things. Like just to give you an idea, Chapter 1 is called How to Become an Actor in Film or Television. Chapter 2 is How to Parent a Child Actor, how to be a voice actor, how to be a stunt performer, how to become a writer, how to be a director, how to be a producer, how to crowdfund your indie project. I mean, this goes into detail for every single, I would say, major category or role. And there's very specific advice in there about how to not compare yourself, how to not let other people tell you when you're too young or too old, etc. But I'm curious because you have this background in particular with Asian American films. So I'm curious if you were to write a chapter on how to be an actor as an Asian American, what would you put in there?
Oh my goodness. How to be an actor as an Asian American. I mean,
Would the advice
the
be the
beginning
same or is there a difference for everyone else?
I think the original advice would be the same, right? Because the advice
Mhm,
is like, okay, you need to understand what this job is. I think what
mhm,
one of the sources, I think his name is Ben Whitehair, who's an actor. He says in that chapter, like, um, a lot of actors, coming out of school, who have been cast in every single play, they think that's what Hollywood's gonna be like, and that's not what Hollywood is like for actors at all. Like, in fact, most of the time, is auditioning and getting rejected. Yeah, that's what every
mhm,
actor said. It's sort of like the job is auditioning and getting rejected. And unless you're like a star, like a celebrity, um, the time you spend on set is not that much. So you are spending a lot of time just sort of investing in yourself, investing in your craft because the way it is, you have to be so good because it's still a craft, right? It's sort of like if you're
mhm,
on the set, you have this amount of time to deliver this performance. Can you do
mhm,
it in that amount of time with all the things going on? You know what I mean? Like,
mhm,
so I think the beginning I think the advice is still the same because you have to get really, really good and you have to know what you're getting into. But
mhm,
then there's always like the mental health aspect of it, which from the really beginning of the series, I was talking to people that I'd interviewed before about like, okay, if I was doing a guide to Hollywood, like what are the components we should have? And it was actually them who were like, mental health is like the biggest thing that you have to manage in order to have longevity in in this career because it's just so hard. So I feel like
mm,
for the beginning's the same, but then when you talk about what my advice is for Asian Americans, I think it's for the same for any group that's not represented very often. It's just the
mm,
opportunities are so much harder. So it's like everything that is hard is gonna be that much harder, you know? So it's
mm,
like and then all that a lot of the advice is like, you have to find a community, right? Like, how can you go
mm.
through this? You have to find some sort of stability, right?
Yes.
To kind of be able to weather this instability and this constant rejection. And, people not only in the industry who know what you're going through, but honestly, people outside of the industry too who can remind you that this isn't the entire world. You know what I mean? And I feel
Mm,
like that part managing it, I think if you're going in as an Asian American, like, you have to be even stronger. That's also, like, that's
mm,
the whole thing, I think, with going into Hollywood in general. I think a lot of the advice there is really just life advice. Like, that's why I
mm,
really loved working on the book, and I love talking to everyone, and I don't have dreams of working in Hollywood, but everything that I learned from them, I thought was applicable in my own life.
mm.
But it's just like when you're
Like what?
going into an industry that's so much more unstable and much more full
Mhm,
of rejection, you have to be that much stronger. You know what I mean?
mm.
And that much more resilient.
When you talk about that much stronger and that much more resilient, what are the kind of mental key things for them to remember, especially as somebody who's trying to break into Hollywood as an Asian American? You probably already know that you're really often going to get auditions because they're looking specifically for an Asian role. I mean, to this day, I'm guessing most studios are not outright seeing Asian Americans in the same light that they see, let's say, a white actor. Let's say if they're casting for an action movie, we're just not seeing that level of diversity in numbers yet. So what would be the mental things to keep in mind when you're being casted into that position?
I think it's just really knowing about yourself and what
Mm.
your strengths are. Right? And then kind of
Hmm.
building upon your strengths. That's kind of general advice too. That's when I say, a lot of the advice is life advice, but it's just extra
Hmm.
important if you're an actor in Hollywood. Because you say,
Mm.
like, some people, like, they are gonna get cast in, like, if there's a martial arts movie, like,
Mm.
and that's not even necessarily a bad thing, like, to get cast in a martial arts movie. I know it's a stereotype, for Asian men that they only do martial arts, but it's like, you have to be pretty well trained in order to get cast in that movie, you know what I mean? And it can
Sure.
provide a lot of work, right?
Hmm.
But it's like, is that your strength, right? Or
Hmm.
are you, like, a comedy person? Like,
Sure.
are you gonna go kind of do a lot of improv and kind of go through that scene because that's what your strengths are.
Mm.
And then I think there's definitely people who are able to get cast in non-Asian roles. I feel like I've seen an interview with Sherry Cola who was saying like, she gets cast for stuff that aren't written as Asian all the time. So it just kind of really
Mm.
depends on who you are. It's the hard for this book in general, but actors as well. It's hard to give specific advice because it's also comes back to, like, who are you? Like, what do you
Mm.
bring? And at the end of the day, it's, like, really knowing yourself, right? And your strengths, and how can you, make that shine so that if there is a role somewhere, if there is an opportunity somewhere, people think of you.
Hmm. Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of it that is figuring out, starting with what is it that others will view you as? Like how you view yourself might be different from how others view you. So being very clear of what do you bring to the table? What do you differ? How do you differ from other people probably makes a significant difference in that regard.
Yeah, that's what you talk about a lot too, right?
I'm a big believer in it, right? At the end of the day, we are all so unique, but we're not always great at knowing how to sort of spot the things that we are unique at and then making that more prevalent and prominent. But yeah, it is a universal thing
Mhm.
no matter who you are and where you're at. There is always um that self that we're still always trying to get to know.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the advice you give is also really good for people in the entertainment industry, because it's sort of, I think when we think about, climbing the corporate ladder or something like that, it's
Mm,
that's not as much a thing, unless you're an executive or something, but there's definitely some fields where there's that, but also, like, when you're in Hollywood, you almost have to, like, make your own ladder, you know what I
mm,
mean? And then the
mhm.
ladder you drop off the ladder all the time, but then maybe you get better at hopping to the 4th rung, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
it's less of a
so
ladder and more of a roller coaster.
yeah, 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 but it's sort of like you're doing parkour,
Yeah, you're doing
Yeah, your
parkour.
career.
Yeah, you're
Yeah, yeah.
stunt diving from, like, one car to another, hoping to catch something in midair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But at the end of
Oh,
the day, if you get a grip on that ladder, you need to know how to you know what I mean? You're, like,
yeah.
on the roller coaster and you're like, "Oh, shoot, I got thrown
Okay.
onto this ladder."
Yeah.
Like, you need to know how to hold on.
Yeah.
And then you
It
need to know how to, like, do all the things that you talk about in your books, you need to
Mhm.
know, like, who are you? How can you, like,
Yeah.
um, you know, let people know what you're doing?
Mhm.
How can you, all that stuff, right? It's still a business at the end of the day, right? So I
Always.
think that's part of it too. Like, this book is not really about, like, how do you become a really, really good actor? Like, you should go take classes and train and do all that stuff. It's about, like, okay, like, I'm out of school, like, I think the given is that you always need to be, like, bettering yourself in your craft. Like, that's just the
Mhm.
given, but then
Mhm.
what else do you also have to do, you know?
100%. So let's say that you're talking to somebody now who is coming to you and going, "Hey, I'm coming out of school. I wanna be, let's say, going to Hollywood, and I just got your book. Is there anything that you'd, like top level stuff? Obviously, go get your book, go and like read through all the details. But is there anything top level that you suggest to them? I feel like there's so many people, as you say, who are interested in going into Hollywood, but have no idea what it is that they're really signing up for. What would you say to them to give them a sense of how to guide themselves in the process of should I try, to go to LA and make it in the industry, or should I stay here and go and be an accountant like my mom wants me to be?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is understand all the components of Hollywood, and I think that's why this
Mm,
book is structured like that, it's not just about, like, acting, writing, and directing, but it goes through I think it's, like, 28 chapters of different jobs from pre-production to,
mhm,
acting, writing, directing, of course, but, like, representation, like, managers and agents, and then, design people, camera people, post-production people.
mhm,
Um, understand all of those components because
mhm.
it's such a collaborative industry that,
Mm,
um, everybody has to work together in order to, like, make this product, right? So,
mhm,
wherever you land in the industry, it's best if you understand kind of how it works and the language of all of it, right?
mhm,
Um, but I think the reason I would tell people to, like, read a book like ours or really just find out the information any other way is because as we were talking to so many people throughout different jobs, like, it happened all the time where people would say, "Oh, like, I wanted to be a actor or writer, director, but I didn't realize, like, there was this job that I would actually be better at." You know what I mean? It's kinda like
mm.
our Asian American equivalent of, like, doctor, lawyer, engineer, where, like, we thought those were the only options. But in Hollywood, it's like people think, "Oh, actor, writer, director, producer." Maybe they think editor,
Yeah,
right? Like, it's just
yeah,
people really don't understand, but there's
yeah.
so many different career paths. So we heard all the time, like, I thought I wanted to be an animator, but I realized I wanna do VFX, right? Or, like,
Mm,
I thought I wanted to be a producer, but actually, like, I really like production design. It's just sort of
mhm,
like because I think especially for, people without connections and you don't know that much about the industry, there's a lot of jobs you don't even know exists, right?
mm.
So, I think a lot of the times people who wanna work in Hollywood are like, "I wanna be a director," and that is the hardest job to get, and you're really not gonna get that until have done other jobs or, you just or you it's I feel like there's 2 ways. It's either way, like, you get, like, an assistant job on the set and you learn that way and you work your way up, or you just start by making, like, tiny, tiny, tiny projects and then hope that it gets, like, bigger and bigger and people fund you. But it's such a like, money is such a huge component of the
Always.
industry, like, especially if you wanna be a director, like, you can't just, like, direct. Like, if you wanna write a book, you can write a book and maybe, like, you won't sell it, but you can do it, right? But, like, if you wanna
Mhm.
direct a movie, like, that's, like, thousands of dollars even if it's, like, 2 minutes. You know what I mean? So, a lot of that stuff
Or
is,
more
like
likely tens or hundreds of thousands.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
a lot of it's like, what are the actual jobs, right? Like, what's not the
Mm.
fantasy of the
What's
job, but
around
what
it?
is like the day to day? What's the grind of the job? I think that's what everyone said when we talked to them, it's, like, not glamorous, like, filmmaking
Right.
is not glamorous at all. It's a
Mhm.
grind, and it's a lot of people at the top of their game super stressed out because there's a lot of money on the line, and they don't have that much time, and everyone is underworked, you know, like,
Yeah.
overworked, I mean.
Overworked and yeah, absolutely, under-resourced.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like a
What
pretty stressful job, which is the opposite of what people think it's like, "Oh, yeah, you wear fancy clothes and go on, like, red carpets."
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
what's it's always whenever think about somebody saying, "Oh, I'm really interested in looking into this career path or going down this thing," which is a question I get a lot. Is should I quit my job to go pursue X, right? Especially
Yeah,
those who
yeah.
come from a background of being like, okay, I pursue this job because my parents suggested it's a good idea, or I thought that my teacher said it's a good idea, or I thought that is a good idea, but now I'm realizing I want to go into this creative pursuit. And as you said,
Yeah.
in Hollywood, there's just so many different ways to see that creative pursuit. There's everything from I to this to today is I was today years old when I found out what the word Foley artist is. That is
Yeah,
a new
the
term.
wasn't our poker.
I'm like, "What? There's such a thing as a Foley artist or music supervisor as opposed to just like the
Yeah,
sound designer?" There's just so many different roles. And the
I
question is always,
know.
how do you fall in love with what's, the iceberg, what's beneath the water in the iceberg? Because that's really your day to day. That's what you're every single day you're waking up to go do. It's not showing up on set. It's so many more things that makes up the grind. And how do you fall in love with that? Right.
Yeah, yeah. What do you tell them?
Um, do really, really have conversations with people who are in the field. I think this is
Yeah.
really the biggest part of it is if you can really take a look and shadow what's the reality behind it and then get your ego out of the way as soon as possible. Because
That's good
most of the time
advice.
when we think that this is the path we want to go into, we are so hyper focused with this idea that once I get X, why will happen. It's what we call the magic island. Like we all have an idea like once I get this part, once I get this position, once I get this job, then everything will be different. And then my entire life is going to change. And the reality is when you actually do start talking to people who've made it to that island is that they just land on the island and then they look for the next island. And they don't
Yeah, yeah, that's
real
hard, yeah.
right? Like we get so quickly used to our new surroundings and then it's just okay, well what's next? And, even
Yeah.
people like Simu Liu, like today, Simu is probably waking up, I'm assuming, not thinking, looking at the mirror and being like, I'm freaking Simu, but rather probably facing what he perceives to be really mundane list of things to do, which might be different from what you and
Guy's
I
a
think about.
businessman, right?
Yeah, exactly. He is like we're all business people. Like we're all
Oh,
in the
yeah.
business of managing ourselves. And that's really it. And the
Yeah,
quicker we
yeah.
get to that, I would say the better.
I love how you phrase it like that because that is what I think of this book as, truly, because
Mhm,
we're journalists, so we have access. Like that's what we have as journalists. We can call people up and be like, "Hey, like I'm doing an interview. Can you tell me about your job?" And that's not
mhm.
something that most people can do, especially if you're young, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
so I feel like that was what I felt like I was trying to do for people to sort of be like, "Okay, I'm gonna
Mm,
pretend that I'm somebody who wants to get the job, and one, I
mm,
have the access to talk to this person. Also, I don't have the, kind of the baggage or the insecurity to like, I don't want because I think if I was trying to talk to somebody successful in a field that I wanted to get in, I would be nervous and I would not want them to think I was stupid and I probably wouldn't ask the basic questions because I would want them to know that I already knew that because I did all the research, I did all the homework. I didn't have any of that baggage. Like I would go talk to like a costume designer and I would just be like, I don't know anything about this. Can you tell me from step 1? And the thing
yeah.
is, like, most of
Treat
the
me like a
time I realized,
kindergarten.
like, nobody. Yeah, 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 and, like, I was able to do that with,
Mm,
s s but then a lot of times that's kind of what you need, because sometimes like, we especially if it's an industry like Hollywood where there's just a lot of misconceptions, like,
mhm,
a lot of the things you believe are not actually true. So, I feel like I thought of us as journalists as sort of doing all of those Q&As for you, like, doing like, all those, like, can I pick your brain? Like, can you get a lunch with me? Can you
Mm,
just tell me this? Like, we try to just do all that for you, and then we just try to consolidate it in like an easy to digest thing. And it's
mm,
not like a magic potion, because there's no magic potion to become successful in Hollywood, but there is information and there's examples of what other people did. And I feel like it's just a lot of stuff in there where you can take a look at it and think, is that going to work for me or not? So I'm sure, as
mm.
as a coach, it's sort of like something that works with someone is not going to work for someone else.
Oh, yeah.
And then, like, yeah, it's like everything could work or everything could fail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So but it helps to sort of just, like you said, like if you can talk to people in the industry or just learn about it, or even like at this day and age, like watch a lot of YouTubes of people
Mhm.
talking about
Yeah.
working in the industry, and then you
Mhm.
just think like, could I do that? Could I really do that? And like, would I fit in
Mm,
there? Like, so that's what I hope this book is, like just somebody who could never talk to all these people. Like we just try
mm.
to force them to give us all their best advice.
Amazing. Thank you for doing all the groundwork that for anyone who is interested in breaking into the field can now take a look at. So, because you've been a journalist interviewing so many different people in the field for the last, more than decades, right? Like, I'm curious, what were your favorite stories or interactions that you've had with perhaps celebrities or people who are acting?
Well, we were talking about this before offline, but or oh yeah, actually, sorry. So you mentioned this in the beginning of the show, so I feel like we should go back to it. But there was a version of myself that was a creator of a hot Asian man calendar. And that is where I met a lot of these now celebrities, but at the time most of them were sort of emerging actors.
Yep.
But when I was at a magazine called Audrey Magazine, it's an Asian American women's lifestyle magazine. I know I've seen it. It was a print publication, so it would be at like Barnes and Noble, and it was really cool because it's just like a rare time that we would see Asian Americans on the cover of magazines at that time. So I was working for them, and at the time we were sort of all very aware of these stereotypes of Asian American men as sort of like nerds and emasculated and, like
Mhm.
not like a hot love interest. But for us as Asian American women who are around Asian American men a lot, we're kind of like, this is so dumb. Right? This is so silly. But we are gonna but of course, well, let's use this as an excuse to break the stereotype. And the way to break the stereotype is to just do content on hot Asian American men. So, like the way to break one stereotype is to show the extreme, the opposite extreme, and then people will realize there's like a whole spectrum of, whatever, in this case, hotness. So
Uh-huh.
I had a series where, and I think I was always thinking this is like a silly stereotype, so we should just combat that with silliness because, like, yeah, I was just like we should just show how dumb it is. So I think I came up with this idea that was like, why don't we like do a poetry series where
Mhm.
we like ask Asian men about their hotness through poetry. But of course, none of us are poets, so let's go with haikus because it's like the easiest one. And then so I just was like, I just think it would be really funny if we like approached like really good looking Asian American men and was like, I'm starting the series. It's like, at the time it wasn't called that yet, but it ended up being called Haikus with Hotties, where we're like, I'm going to ask you questions about your hotness through haiku. And like, shout out to all the people who did it in the beginning when it wasn't a thing, because I had to explain this.
That must have been a really fun conversation to dive into, eh?
Oh, yeah. I think honestly, like looking back at that time, I was like, yeah, I think I'm less like scared or just less self-conscious about so many things, or I just don't take a lot of like kind of intimidating things as scared as
Yeah,
or
because
sorry,
'cause
I'm
I'm
just
looking at
not
the
as intimidating things because
yeah.
I'm also the person who has emailed very good looking Asian men to be like, hey, like, "I have this idea. Can we do, like, a poetry exchange about your hotness?" And that's just such, like, a weird thing to do, and I almost got desensitized to it because I was just like, "Oh, at the end of the day, if they think I'm crazy, they'll be flattered." Like, who doesn't like getting an email that was like, "Oh, we want you to be on a hot
We
Asian
think
man
you're so
calendar." At
hot.
the end of the day, I'm, like, saying you're an attractive person, right? Um, but yeah, that was where I did meet a lot of, like, Asian men in the media, and if you look at it now, it's really funny because it looks like we got really, really famous people on it, because
Yeah, I
people
mean,
like
I'm looking
you
at I
mentioned
see, Randall Park, I see Ian Chen, I see Simu, I see Freddie Wong. I mean, there are some really incredible humans that you've done. And it was done from
yeah.
2016, 2017, 2018, right?
Yeah, there's, like, 4 years in there. Even now, like, Deli Boys is a great show on Hulu now, and both of those guys, Asif
Oh,
Ali
yeah.
and Sagar Sheikh were on the
Oh, yeah.
I just
Are
I was
you
like, now it's like, I think, like, 3 of them have been in Marvel movies,
Oh,
like,
yeah. Are you doing more? Is there a
I we
2025,
haven't done in a
2026 one coming
while.
out?
Like, my brother, out of everybody, always asks me if we're gonna do more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it made me because I think at the time, though, I think it was like I think it sort of felt like it was such a dumb thing, but this was pre, like, K-pop becoming a big thing. This was
Mhm.
before Crazy Rich Asians. This was before a lot of things, so I don't know. When I think about bringing it back now, I'm sort of like, "Don't people already know that, like, Asian men are hot?" But then people like you and my brother are like, "We should bring it back," or, like, other women will be like, "We should bring it back."
I
But
mean,
it
I
was
did
like a good format to just, like, direct people to, kind of talent that they might not have otherwise known about. That was actually the kind of the gimmick for the very first one. It was a Kickstarter, and I was like, "If you donate to this calendar and we make it, we're gonna send it to casting offices. We're gonna" So we did. I sent a whole bunch of I don't know if it actually made any difference, but I think it was just, like, some shenanigans, right? We took it and I was like, "Well, what are the big casting offices in LA?" And then I was like I just, like, sent them these
amazing.
Asian calendars. But that was also kind of like kind of back to what we're talking about, sort of like knowing the reality of
Mhm.
being an actor in Hollywood, right? 'Cause,
Totally.
um, these people who, are now in big movies, even, like, the people who you think of as like your Asian American stars. A lot of the times I would interview them for something, you'd realize like they don't know if they're going to get another job, right? And that's just the reality of Hollywood and being an actor. And there's just a lot
Mhm.
of insecurity and not like, it's not like a character flaw. It's almost like just the reality of your situation. It's your environment, right? Like,
Absolutely.
um, so yeah, that kind of yeah, that just kind of made me wanna help these poor, super hot Asian American men who,
I'm
like,
sorry.
are not the
That is the
stars
best
of
sentence I think I'll hear all day. I just really felt so compassionately called into doing the charity work for these
I did, yeah, I mean, I
ridiculously
think,
hot 8-pack holding Asian hotties and really,
I
like, help them
know.
be seen for their hotness.
I know, because I think everyone thought that I was, like, convincing these men to, like, take off their shirts, and I like to say for the record, I was telling them they didn't have to take off to be hot. I was like, like, a suit looks really good. No, but I do think though, like, kind of I don't know if my brother's gonna hate this, but I think it's like I did because I think a lot of these, like, actors at that time were, like,
Yeah.
younger than me, right? They were, like,
Uh-huh.
trying to get into the industry.
Uh-huh.
So, I did think of it like, like, my brother's not an actor, but, he's like, I feel like people come up to me and say he's good looking, but I feel like you see kind of growing up in just society, right? Like, as an Asian American man, especially, kind of just in the
Yeah.
dating world and the working world, you're told these things, and I was just like, "This is dumb." Like, my brother's, like, the most fun, cool person ever, right? Like, so I just sort of understood the kind of insecurities of Asian American men a little bit, right? So, I think I
Yeah.
just wanted to do something in a more silly way. Um, but now I don't know, I just feel like I hope it's obvious now that people, like, I don't know,
Well,
that
I
Asian
I
men
think
are,
that
like,
as an
not a
Asian man
monolith.
As an Asian man, I'm gonna go ahead and thank you for showcasing hot Asian guys. And even though I might not make it next to the 8 pack holding, other guys
Well,
on the
if we
list.
did it now, I probably would be approaching, like, people like you. Because actually, the thing with the Hot Asian Man calendar, I think the very, very kind of modelly, actor, attractive six-pack men did get all the attention on the media, but if you actually look at the calendar, it was an attempt to kind of widen the idea of what makes people attractive, right? So, we have people like Sean Rameswaram, who's, like, the host of the Vox podcast Today
Okay.
Explained. So, I mean, he's on there,
Mm.
right? We have Hari Kondabolu, who's also hot, but also, like, a very good amazing comedian, right? So, we just sort of had a spectrum of people who are just really, really talented. I think we have so it wasn't just, like, the Yoshi and Peter Sudarsus, although they were the most fun for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just looking at the 2020 hotties and like looking at the massive arms that some of these people have, like Kenta
I know, it's
Seiki
actually
and
crazy to
Gerard
look
Lobo.
back
I'm
at it.
like,
I mean, like,
man,
what's
we
his
do
name?
not.
Eugene Lee Yang was on it, like, from the
Oof.
beginning.
Yeah,
Um Yeah, and it's sort of like yeah, it was a good time. I think I did
absolutely.
it for 4 we did it for 4 years. It was me and, Mai Wen, Amanda Lu, and she roped in our sister Elizabeth with I think our significant others were like, "What are you doing?" 'Cause the thing is, I think people thought I was, like, this single girl trying to, like, have an excuse to talk to hot people and take pictures of them, with their shirts
I
off, and
mean,
I was, like, married with young kids, so, like, it was and to me, it was just, like, another magazine, you know what I mean? Like, how are we gonna
yeah.
organize this as a magazine, except for now we have 12 spreads, and we
Um,
have to organize the photo shoots or get the photos, and then we also have the content is the haiku. So how can
yeah.
I ask them about their hotness through haiku?
It's about sophistication, right? It isn't just it's kinda like back in the
Um,
day where people were be like, "Oh, I'm only picking up, what is it, Playboys and Maxims for the articles." Like, "No, no, I'm only picking up the magazine for the poetry."
that would be my argument is, like I truly believe this, if you go and look at the calendars and
Uh-huh.
you, like, just, take the hot men aside and you look at the poetry, I think,
Yeah.
like, you'd, like, find them even hotter because some of the haikus they wrote are, like, really good. They're,
Mm.
like, really clever.
Mm.
I
Well,
mean,
that's
like,
a really
there was one the cover that was, like, Kenta Seki, who's
Uh-huh.
a, physical trainer, and
Uh-huh.
it's gonna be really hard to not get distracted because we put the haiku on his abs, but it's a really good haiku. Something about, like, my parents told me to, like, take care of my body, but don't treat I don't know, I'm not gonna go look at it's a really good
Go
haiku
get
and
the
just good,
haikus.
like, life
Go get the
advice.
calendars. You can still buy them even though the calendar,
I don't
are
think you can
from.
buy them, but you can find me, and I have some extra I can send them to
So speaking of which, this is a perfect segue for us to kind of bring this episode to a close. How do people find your book, and if they want to check out the haikus with hotties, and as well as your podcast, all these things, which I have a feeling that there's probably at least a couple of thirsty fans in the audience who might already be clicking through the show notes. Where do they
I
find
love
your all of
sorry.
your amazing work and all your content?
I love that I spent um, part of this podcast promoting a book that's actually coming out, and then a good portion of this podcast promoting a calendar that is not available.
That you can't even buy
But
anymore.
but yeah, so the book is available for pre-order. You can go to Simon& and Schuster's website. It's
Mhm,
called Breaking into New Hollywood.
mhm.
You can find me on my handle on Instagram is Ada Tseng, my name AdatSeng and 88 for luck. And then, and I also host a podcast called Saturday School with my friend Brian, where we basically direct people to all the like Asian American films that we loved. Like we
Amazing.
treat it. You were saying you love the name Saturday School, and like even though we don't have time to talk about it now, I love that your mom started your community Saturday School because my mom was also that Chinese
Yeah.
school teacher. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was the influence for that the podcast. We my co-host is a professor, so we design it in seasons and syllabuses over topics, and then we direct people to these Asian American films that we used to cover in at Asia
Mm,
Pacific Arts at film festivals. But at the time, like you would have only seen it if you were at the film festival. But now a lot of
mm,
these are available on streaming for free or for like $2.99 on Amazon Prime or something. And we're like, well, we want
mhm,
people to know about it. So
mhm.
that's another
Absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely. What's the next season gonna be about? Do we get a sneak
Oh,
preview?
I can't say. I can tell you offline because there's an idea, but we haven't committed yet. But yeah,
Okay, can you share the
I
idea?
hope
Is
it's
it a
about
secret?
love, though. I'll say that. I hope it's about love.
Yes, please. Yeah, speaking of
Yeah.
Asian hotties, we definitely need a season that talks all about our love, sex, relationships, all that stuff. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If you have not seen Ada's work yet, go check out her book coming out, check out her podcast. And, if you ask her really nicely, maybe she'll send you a calendar filled with some Asian hotties. But remember, you're just reading it for the haikus. Thanks so much for listening to our show. Hey, before you go, I just wanted to let you know that Big Asian Energy, the book, is officially out, and you can go and pick it up anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, etc. If you've ever felt like there's something stopping you from reaching your full potential, if you've ever felt like you want to have that unstoppable charisma and confidence in the work that you do, as well as just the way you show up in life, this might be the book for you. It is a book that is jam packed with research studies, advice, case studies, stories, and of course, so many different techniques and takeaways, including communication, as well as mindset, as well as confidence, and all the other topics out there. It just won one of the best books of 2025 on Amazon. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go take a look. And finally, if you have a few seconds, can I also ask you to leave a quick review for Big Asian Energy? It not only means the world to us to hear from you, but more importantly, it does absolutely help us in reaching more audiences. And finally, I hope you're having an amazing day. And thanks again for listening to Big Asian Energy.